Matthew 13:3. Then he, Jesus, taught them many things by using stories. He said, a farmer went out to scatter some seeds in a field. While the farmer was scattering the seeds, some of it fell along the road and was eaten by birds. Other seeds fell on the thin, rocky ground and quickly started growing because the soil wasn't very deep. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and dried up because they did not have enough fruit. Some other seeds fell where the thorn bushes grew up and choked the plants. But a few seeds did fall on the good ground, where the plants produced 100 or 60 or 30 times as much as what was scattered. If you have ears, pay attention. And verse 18. Now listen to the meaning of the story about the farmer. The seeds that fell along the road were the people who hear the message about the kingdom but don't understand it. Then the evil one comes and snatches the message from their hearts. The seeds that fell on the rocky ground are the people who gladly hear about the message and accept it right away, but they don't have deep roots and they don't last very long. As soon as life gets hard or the message gets them in trouble, they give up. The seeds that fell among the thorn bushes are also people who hear about the message, but they start worrying about the needs in this life and are fooled by the desire to get rich. So the message gets choked out and they never produce anything. The seeds that fell on the good ground are people who hear and understand the message. They produce as much as 100 or 60 or 30 times what was planted.
It's a little story that communicates a big idea. And that's kind of what all parables are, really. They're little stories that communicate big ideas. And whenever we look at a parable, we should be asking ourselves the questions, where do we see ourselves in this story? How are we receiving the message of the story? And specifically for this parable, how are we receiving the message of the kingdom of God, that truth? If we let it kind of penetrate our soul, let it get below the surface to change the landscape of our heart. And wherever you are on your faith journey, wherever you might be at, whatever your worldview is, I know that you feature somewhere in this story because we all feature somewhere in this story. So firstly, what is the seed? What's the message that this parable is talking about? Well, Jesus has been talking to a whole crowd of people. He's been communicating all sorts of different things about what the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is like. And the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, those phrases get used interchangeably, is basically God's rule and God's reign. Now, God has been ruling forever and will rule forever. His rule and his reign knows no end. But in a sense, when Jesus came, it was kind of like the inauguration of the kingdom. Now, this week we've had an inauguration. You might have seen Joe Biden become the new president of the United States of America. But as old as Sleepy Joe is, his rule and his reign is not going to last forever and ever. But in a sense, when Jesus came, it was like the inauguration of the kingdom of God, because he came saying things that nobody else had ever said before. He came saying things like, hey, you were made for more than this. That you've got life and you've got purpose and you've got meaning and you've got significance that you're yet to discover. That actually you were created for not just relationship, but friendship with your Creator. That you were created by love and for love. You were created by perfection and for perfection. You were created for harmony and you were created for wholeness. That's the message of this kingdom. And every kingdom, it has a mission or it has a mandate. And this kingdom, the kingdom of God, is no different to that. But what is the mission or the mandate of the kingdom of God? It's the reconciliation of mankind and the restoration of creation back to the way that God always intended it to be. I don't know if you've wondered, why didn't Jesus's kingdom come the way we just saw the US president get inaugurated? Why didn't it come like that? Why did he arrive in a backwater town 2,000 years ago when there were no TV cameras? Why didn't he come in the middle of Washington, D.C. in 2021 when there were TV cameras and the world was watching so everyone would believe in him? Why didn't Jesus come like that? Well, it's because God's kingdom is different from any kingdom in this world. See, kingdoms of this world, they tend to come like a boulder looking to beat people into submission. But actually the kingdom of God, it comes gently, like a seed, this kind of seemingly insignificant, totally underwhelming thing, because the message is what changes the landscape of the world around us. And what was the message that Jesus came with? It's this crazy message that actually God came from heaven to earth, and that actually he triumphed by being tortured and killed. And that for his followers, the way to really find ourselves is to lose ourselves. And if we really want to be rich, we've got to give away all our money. And if we want to be powerful, the way to do that is to become the humble servant of other people. It came as this crazy little message. And that little message is meant to change the whole landscape. It is. It's meant to change the whole landscape of the world. Because the kingdom of God comes by receiving a truth. This little thing that doesn't seem to make any difference initially, but eventually changes the landscape of everything that is around it. Now, if you haven't realized it yet, basically the message is the message of Jesus. And so if Jesus is the seed in this parable, then our hearts kind of represent the soil that has been talked about in this parable. And I know that aspirationally we'd all like to think that we're like that fourth type of soil, but let's just pretend for a moment that maybe we're not all there, and actually we're more like one of the first three types of soil that got mentioned than we care to admit. So let's look at each one of these briefly. Verse 4 says, "As he was scattering the seeds, some fell among the path, and the birds came and ate it up." So my first question for you is, do you respond to the message of Jesus with like a hard heart? Do you respond to it just intellectually? Because, you know, it's possible to come to the word regularly, but for it never really to have got below the surface of your soul. You know, until that seed, in a sense, penetrates the surface, then it'll only ever be like a philosophy. That's all Christianity will really be for us, just another philosophy. And so yes, we're called to love the Lord our God with all our mind, but we shouldn't stop there. How do you know if that seed has really penetrated your soul and really got below the surface? Well, I think we're lost in wonder, awe and praise at the wonder of who God is and what he's done and who he's called us to be. Like, have you responded emotionally to those things? Because if you haven't, then maybe that seed has never really got below the surface of your heart. The second type of soil, verse 5 and 6, says, "Some seed fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root." And do you respond to God with a shallow heart, just emotionally? Perhaps there was a point in your life where you did respond to the wonder of Jesus. Perhaps like that seed did take root in your heart in some way. You moved past the kind of theoretical, it moved from your head to your heart. But then the sun came. Maybe some life's challenges came. Maybe you lost some things that you used to value. And you began to ask yourself the question, what is the point of God if I can't have this stuff? Maybe you began to respond a little bit like the sons did in the parable that Craig preached from last week, who valued the Father's stuff more than they valued the Father himself. Perhaps if you identify with this type of soil, maybe when you became a Christian, if you would call yourself a Christian, maybe you thought that you were entering Christ's kingdom, but what you really wanted in your heart of hearts was for him to enter your kingdom. That's the second type of soil. What about the third type of soil? Verse 7 says, "Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants." You know, do we respond to God with a divided heart? You know, it's kind of, we're sharing control of our heart with other things. It's Christ plus other stuff. Our hearts have become divided and we're being choked by the things in this life. You see, the message of the gospel is Jesus, full stop. It's not Jesus plus something else. It's not Jesus plus my career, Jesus plus my relationship, Jesus plus my reputation, Jesus plus my identity, Jesus plus my pursuit of wealth or pursuit of overseas holidays or any of those sorts of things. The message of the gospel is just Jesus. And all those things in and of themselves, they're not necessarily bad things, but those things become bad things if those good things become God things for us. Because that's effectively what idolatry is. It's putting something in the place of where only God ought to be. So three types of soil. Do you respond to God with a hard, just an intellectual heart? Do you respond to him with a shallow heart where you've only responded emotionally? Do you respond to him with a divided heart where you're sharing control of your life with other things? Well, the wonderful thing about this parable is that it's not a life sentence. Wherever you find yourself in the story, the truth is that soil can change. If the message, if the seed is Jesus, and if the soil represents our hearts, then who's the gardener? God's the gardener, right? I know that you've got thorns in your life that are choking you, and I know that you've got rocks in your heart, and sometimes you feel hard-hearted, because I do too. But the wonderful thing is, it's not the soil's job to get rid of the thorns. It's not the soil's job to get rid of the rocks. We need to go to the gardener for that. We need to say, hey, God, I've got this blockage, I've got these thorns, I've got these rocks. Would you deal with them for me? What do you think he's going to say? Sure, I'll take your thorns. I already did. They crowned me with them. Sure, I'll take your rocks. I already did. They buried me under them. How does an undivided heart look? How does that fourth type of soil look? It responds to the message by saying, Christ is enough for me. I've decided to follow Jesus. Everything I need is in him. No turning back. No turning back. And so wherever you find yourself in this story, whatever you feel like is stopping you from responding wholeheartedly in the way that you would love to, bring it to Jesus, because he wants to deal with it on your behalf. God bless you guys.